I am excited to welcome my guest today, Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. He is with me live from Columbus, Ohio, virtually, like everything is these days. He is the perfect person to be hearing from, in my opinion. He's a neuroscientist, behavioral economist, professor, and author. In my mind, he's the doctor of disaster avoidance because he is an expert on decision making. So today our topic is mind under the Mind Money Motion podcast. And decision making is certainly a big part of what our mind does. Risks and the associated risks that go with going with your gut is the specific topic today. Gleb has actually written a book called Never Go With Your Gut. And so he is going to enlighten us on decision making in general. And Gleb, I remember first reading an article that you had posted on LinkedIn about the COVID-19 situation and your overall observation that society here, anyway, was being way too optimistic. I'm curious what prompted you to write that, and especially related to COVID-19, what you think is a more realistic outlook.
Unfortunately, a lot of people seem to think that COVID-19 will blow over in a few months. And that's a very unrealistic outlook. Whether they got that idea from media, from political leaders, from many other sources, it is not the case. It's simply not the case if you look at the facts. And we don't do a very good job of looking at the facts because our gut reactions, our intuitions, our feelings are not adapted for looking at the facts. That's not what they're adapted for. They're adapted for survival. So our gut intuitions, our instincts, our reactions, they drive about 80 to 90% of what we do, what we think, how we feel, when we just go forward naturally and let them do their thing. Unfortunately, they're not adapted for the modern world environment. They're adapted for the savanna environment, when we were hunters and gatherers living in small tribes of 15 people to 150 people, and when we had to have a very strong fight or flight response in order to successfully escape saber-toothed tigers. They might have heard of it as a saber-toothed tiger response when we had to jump at 100 shadows in order to get away from that one saber-toothed tiger. Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, we have many less saber-toothed tigers right now, but the kind of threats that we're facing are really different. We're not facing the kind of intense, in the moment, emotion-laden threats that the savannah was characterized by. We're instead facing a lot of threats like the pandemic, which is a kind of a slow-moving train wreck. It was visible already in December 2019 when, for people who are looking at the world and how events were developing, is when it was starting in China, and it was present in a pretty large city called Wuhan. Now, Wuhan, China, it doesn't sound like a large city. Now, it's not a city that the vast majority of Americans are familiar with, but it's a huge city. It's 11 million people. It's actually called the Chicago of China, and it's a major transport hub, domestic transport. It also has 500 international flights a day, and it produces over $22 billion of revenue per year, to give you an idea of the kind of economic power it has. So it's a huge metropolis. It's one of the China's I think it's China's ninth largest cities and one of the 9 premier cities of China. There are 9 big cities in China, and 11 million is bigger than any city in the US. So that gives you some idea of how major of a city it is, and it's a pretty well-developed city, but it still had a lot of trouble coping with COVID-19. Had to shut down the whole city, including putting chains on people's doors, which I don't think we'd have here in the US, fortunately. But that was some pretty serious restrictions, and China was able to do that because it's an authoritarian country. Well, when COVID-19 came out of China into developed countries like Italy. Now, northern Italy is very tied to Wuhan because of just historical context. There is a large Chinese expat community living there, and Wuhan was the COVID-19 first landed in Europe and developing countries in northern Italy. And northern Italy, Milan and so on, that's a very developed area, more developed than Wuhan. It's just as developed as any area economically, medically, and so on in the US, perhaps more so in terms of having a better mental health, having a better health system in terms of more people being covered. But it was very quickly overwhelmed by COVID-19, very quickly overwhelmed. And so looking at that example, it was very clear that, hey, COVID-19 was going to come here to the US, and if we didn't do the kind of things that countries around China did to effectively address COVID-19, we'd be kind of in a bad position. And what they did, so for example, Singapore, Japan, South Korea, where COVID-19 came pretty quickly, they had very strict testing regimes, control, contact tracing, and so on. We did not have, and that didn't happen in Italy, and that happened in Germany, which pretty quickly controlled its own COVID-19 problem, but it had no way that happened in the US. And so COVID-19 quickly blew up. It's in all 50 states, and it's causing major, I mean, the US has become the country with the highest number of deaths of COVID-19, which is pretty terrible and horrible in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on the United States. And people are still thinking that, hey, economy will open up, it will go away soon. It won't happen. When you looked at countries that did successfully control COVID-19, like I mentioned Singapore, Japan, South Korea, and so on, when they started loosening their restrictions, the COVID-19 started springing up and becoming a serious problem there when they loosened the restrictions. So they had to clamp down the restrictions once again in the areas where COVID-19 was popping up. And that's what will happen in the US. As we loosen our restrictions, COVID-19 will start growing in certain areas, and those areas, states, will have to shut down and clamp down again. And so we will not deal with COVID-19 in any meaningful fashion, any realistic fashion, until we develop a vaccine. A vaccine, and we have to not simply develop it, which will take 12 to 18 months, but we also have to produce mass quantities of it and distribute it to the people who need it, to vaccinate people. That will take another maybe 12 months, 6 to 12 months. So we are in the best case scenario, we are in early 2022 by the time COVID-19 is dealt with as a problem. And it's actually very unlikely that we will produce a vaccine within 12 months, because when you look at vaccines and their trials, the first few vaccines that are produced for any epidemic are usually not effective, where they're either not safe, they have too many side effects, or they're not effective for addressing the epidemic. So it will probably take quite a bit longer, maybe as long as 5 years, for us to produce and vaccinate people. So we have a 2 to 5 year time range. In the most pessimistic scenario, we will never find an effective vaccine. That's what happened with the flu. We don't have an effective vaccine for the flu. So that's really bad. But let's assume it'll be a 2 to 5 year timeline. And so in that time frame, that is not something that you can assume that it's an emergency, it'll blow over. That's a very serious disruption, major disruption of our world. And it's something that individuals, households are completely unprepared for. They think, overwhelmingly, people think that it will be over in a couple of months, few months, whatever, economy will open up, we'll be fine. That's completely unrealistic, and people are having way too optimistic a perspective on it due to their dangerous judgment errors in our mind that are called cognitive biases that stem from the fight or flight response, or that's one of the responses to it, because the fight or flight response is only for intense, immediate, in the moment threats. So whether the flight response, which is people completely ignoring the pandemic and saying, hey, it's not a problem, all of it's a hoax, whatever, it's not a big deal, or the fight response where people go to the store and do panic shopping of toilet paper and guns, apparently. I didn't know that guns were spiked in sales, I recently found out, and of course other things. So that's the kind of response that people overwhelmingly showed. The flight response ignoring it, the fight response getting stuff, and not actually changing their lives, figuring out a major long-term plan for addressing the pandemic and addressing the kind of cognitive biases that internally cause us to greatly underestimate the impact of the pandemic and make really bad decisions around it.
So the brain is not, like you said, initially wired to really focus on the facts. And so then we add in these cognitive biases that are there. So how do you suggest a person in their individual lives in the COVID-19 situation best move forward given all of that?
What I suggest people do is first understand the kind of cognitive biases that are playing a major negative role in their lives regarding to COVID-19. Now, my book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters, which is both for individuals and for leaders and for businesses, talks about the 30 most dangerous cognitive biases and how to address them effectively. And you can take a look at a list of cognitive biases in Wikipedia. There are over 100 of them that are going to be free, which are most relevant for COVID-19. One is called the normalcy bias. So the normalcy bias refers to the fact that when we think about the world, we feel like the immediate future, the next couple of years, will be kind of like the present, maybe with some changes, maybe more use of cell phones or something like that. But we don't intuitively envision a major disruption. That's not what we're wired for. That's not what this happened in the savannah environment. There were no major disruptions. The world was, tomorrow, in the next few years, was going to actually look like today. But in our current world, we do face a huge major disruption. COVID-19 changed our world in a very fundamental way. When you have a 2-year, in the most optimistic scenario, situation of restrictions and loosening of restrictions, tightening of them, you will not have a world that will be the same. People will change their behaviors, their habits, their patterns of thinking in very fundamental ways. But people are refusing to accept that. It feels very uncomfortable, and so they're rejecting the words of those experts who are saying that this is a major disruption. So that's one, normalcy bias. Second, the planning fallacy. Now, we tend to think that we're good people. We like ourselves, we like the plans that we make, and we think everything will go according to our life plan. And so we don't pivot nearly quickly enough when something disrupts our life plan, when something disrupts our ideas about the future, what will go forward, and we don't build into our plans risks, contingencies, problems, resources to address that. So a lot of people are still going forward with their plans, whether to buy a house or, a lot of people are thinking that they'll have a vacation, and will travel fine or have a wedding when they really should be canceling those and shifting those to virtual settings. Those are really harming people, and unfortunately, they will not work out well. So that's the planning fallacy. Finally, hyperbolic discounting. We tend to be very short-term oriented creatures. Now, that was beneficial in the savannah environment. We couldn't, if we killed a mammoth, couldn't freeze the meat for the long term. But of course, right now, in the modern environment, not the case, right? Right now, we have banks where we can reserve our money. We have a house in which we can invest. We have ourselves who can develop, we can grow personally, have career development, professional development, not like the savannah where we can become a better axe chipper or something. So, right now we can really invest into ourselves, but that's not something that we intuitively feel like is the right thing to do. So a lot of people are investing way too much into the short term and harming their long-term future. So those are 3 cognitive biases that I want to highlight. Now, in responding to them, what you want to do is think about areas of your life that are basic, essential, fundamental needs, and how you can address those needs effectively in this disrupted, changed, different environment. Now, you might have heard about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That has been transcended by more recent research by people like Scott Barry Kaufman and others, which have shown that we have certain fundamental needs that we really need or will feel deprived. Really our life will be screwed up. And then we have personal growth needs, which is what Maslow referred when he talked about self-actualization. So the 3 needs that you want to be thinking about, they're fundamental, basic, completely important things for you as a human being is safety, connection, and self-esteem. Now, let's go through all of those briefly and how they apply to COVID-19. So physical safety. Safety, you want to talk about a variety of safeties, but you want to think about physical safety. So you want to make sure that you can stay in your home for up to 2 months in case there is a serious local outbreak as happened in New York City, or that if you get sick with COVID-19. Now, I say this as someone who has family in New York City. My dad, he's 79, and he's living in New York City, and he very recently, from what I heard from my mom, developed something that looks very much like COVID-19, and I'm pretty sad about that. So it's something that I'm sad about, and it's something that I'm facing realistically, knowing that most likely he'll make it through, but he's having shortness of breath, he's really struggling with things, and so I'm worried about him. And I've been warning my parents that this is a serious situation for a while. Fortunately, they took my warning eventually, even though, a prophet is not a prophet in his own home, right? They eventually took that warning and they stocked up on supplies. And they would have been in a very bad situation if they didn't, because my mom is taking care of my dad, so she's self-quarantining, and my dad is obviously sick, so they're not in a good position to get supplies, to get groceries. And they are really now much better off that they have a pantry full of things lasting them for 2 months. And a lot of people who are trying to order, I mean, my wife and I, when we're trying to order things of Walmart right now, they can only, they ship 2 things of each item, and half the time you don't get what you asked for. So, you don't want to be in that situation. You especially don't want to be going to the grocery store and shopping right now, wearing masks if you have them, or tying a bandana about your face and getting COVID-19. That's not a good situation. So having 2 months worth of groceries is a good idea. And then, of course, you can replenish them over time. That's kind of physical safety. And of course, you want to have medications, other consumables, cleaning products for that time as well. Now, you also want to protect your mental safety. And that means replacing the kind of entertainment and exercise, physical exercise, you used to do with various other options. A lot of people, go to the outside, go to the theater for movie theater, or, watching plays or whatever for entertainment. That's an important form of entertainment. Or you go to a bar, go to a restaurant. My wife and I used to go to a date night, to a restaurant every week. Can't do that anymore. And that is something that adds up and harms you, that you can't do that sort of activity. So you want to figure out how to replace the entertainment that you're used to with new forms of virtual entertainment. The same goes for exercise. You should not be going to the gym right now, even if you're one of the few states where they're open. So you want to figure out how to replace physical exercise with things that you could do. So think about that physical exercises, dumbbells at home, yoga, various forms of workout regimes, and so on. So think about all of those things. Also, think about the kind of information that you're getting. A lot of people are not thinking of safety from the perspective of information, but there's so much misinformation going on in the internet around COVID-19. So you want to make sure that you turn to trusted sources, whether it's the CDC, the WHO, other trusted resources on COVID-19. You want to look at the true experts, and that's why I say the CDC, the WHO. Don't look at political leaders who are saying things that might not be true, that might be spinning things from political perspectives. You want to go straight to the experts, and that's where you don't get the hopeful information that everything will be fine by a couple of months. So that's the first thing, safety. Next, connection to others. So you want to figure out how you will replace that connection to others. You probably used to hang out with friends and family members and so on. And that's one thing. So you want to think about people who are not part of your household. How will you replace your connection with them? Figure out virtual settings. Especially don't want to go and visit grandma right now because a lot of people are carriers of COVID-19 without realizing it. About half of all people who have COVID-19 don't show any symptoms of COVID-19. It's the fact. That's what the recent research on this topic shows. So you might be having COVID-19 without realizing that you're having COVID-19 and getting other people infected. So don't go visit grandma. You don't want to kill grandma right now. And that is something that you need to be thinking about. You want to maintain that social distance for that reason. So think about how you interact with everyone who you care about in your life via virtual means, whether it's Zoom, whether it's other forms of video conference. One of the things I'm doing, for example, with my friends is I'm starting to do a lot of virtual games with them. And these are, let's say, asynchronous games. So, for example, I'm playing Scrabble with a bunch of friends with whom I used to play tennis. And of course, I can't play tennis with them right now, but tennis, we would chat between shots and so on. And Scrabble allows us to do asynchronous play where we separately from each other take some turns and then chat between turns. So that's a way of connecting with people as well. So that's kind of one thing, connecting with people who are not in your household. You also want to be thinking about how will you maintain your relationship and connection with people in your household who you're spending way too much time with.
Yeah, there's that extreme, huh?
Yep, exactly. So there's that extreme, and you want to be thinking about that. With your romantic partner, you probably spent, maybe 1, maybe 2 hours previously. Now you're spending 24/7 with them if you're in the same household. You're probably getting in each other's faces and each other's spaces. You want to figure out how to address that issue early onward before blowing up at each other. The same thing, let's say if you have an older college student who moved back home, and you're also having a lot of tensions and troubles with that. So figure out how you'll address those brewing conflicts in advance of them blowing up. Same thing with kids. If you have young kids living in your home who are right now not going to school, and of course in most states schools have closed throughout the school year, you will probably have to deal with, and summer camps will not happen in the large majority of states. And that's a good thing because you don't want your kids getting COVID-19 and then coming back and home and killing grandma, right? So you don't want that to happen. So you need to figure out how to manage that situation with them being home. And of course, you're probably working virtually. If you're still lucky enough to have a job, you're working virtually. So you have to, and perhaps your romantic partners as well, and other people in your household. So you have to figure out how to manage having a workspace, shared workspace, and do your work while your kids are streaming Netflix and making your internet run super slow. So you need to figure that out. And that's the connection. And of course, self-esteem. Self-esteem is really important. And that terminology here is about mastery, is about control. So you still want to feel that you're in control of your environment, you're in control over your fate. And it's much harder when you're restricted to staying in your house, right? It's important to remember that really the only things you have control over in life are your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors, and really only to some extent because our feelings often drive us to make bad decisions. So we only have some control over some aspects of our lives, and that is all internal. That's all we have control over. So you want to think about how do you respond to this really pretty terrible disruption effectively in such a way as to grow personally and improve yourself, improve your life, improve your own self-management and ability to manage your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors over time as you respond to the situation. And that is what will help you have more self-esteem, more confidence, more mastery over your life. Another aspect of things that will help you have more mastery is specifically working on some skills. So choose a skill that you can work on at home, whether it's picking up a musical instrument or trying to make viral YouTube videos, whatever is your hobby, choose that and work on developing it, strengthening it over this time. As well as having a creative pursuit, creative endeavor. It can be the skill, it can be something different, but a creative endeavor will also help you have mastery. So doing music, doing art, whatever, something creative, again, videos for YouTube, something creative will also have you have that sense of mastery. So those are the three fundamental needs. I won't go into the self-esteem, personal growth needs, because those are kind of higher self-actualization things. You can check them out in my book if you want to learn more about them. But the three fundamental needs, I want to make sure that you have them covered.
Thank you, thank you. Well, and before we do go more into how to learn more about your book and your other research and contacting you, I know one of the things that you had commented in your book about was how you had a professor once that made some comment that life is like 100,000 coin flips, and that statement really changed your life, and I'm curious about that.
Sure, happy to talk about that. So first of all, let's think about coin flips. When we think about a coin flip, that was in the context of him giving me a challenge, whether I would take $40 in cash, so give me $40 in cash, if he gave me $40 in cash, or if I would choose a coin flip for $100 of its heads or $50 of its tails. Now, I chose the cash. It felt nice and secure and safe to have that cash. I didn't want to take the risk of having $0. And he said that the vast majority of people who do this, about 80%, choose the cash. That's largely the thing that people choose. But in reality, financially, from a logical, rational standpoint, not a cognitive bias standpoint, it's much better for me to choose the coin flip because 50%, 50% chance of heads, 50% chance of tails. 50% of 100 is $50, so half 100. And that is the effective choice that he was giving me between $40, 100% of $40, or 50% of $100. The equivalent of 50% of $100 is $50. Unfortunately, we all tend to be by far, 80% risk averse and loss averse. We don't want to lose stuff. So we much rather take that certain thing over that uncertain even thing that is actually better for us. And he pointed out that what would happen if I thought about this from a longer term perspective, from 1,000 coin flips, 10,000 coin flips, 100,000 coin flips. So the 100,000 coin flips versus 100,000 chances to take $40 in cash, I would have either 4 million That's the if I chose the 40,000, so $40 times 100,000 is 4 million, or I would have 50 mil. I would have 5 million. Now 5 million is a much better number, and that's the probability of coin flips. 50% of 100 is the equivalent to 50. I get some heads, some tails, some heads, some tails. Overall, it would average out to around 5 million. So if I choose the safe route, if I choose the less risky route and protect myself from losses, I actually lose out much more than if I choose a route that feels more risky, that feels like I'm not making the wise decision by taking a risk. And that really helped me understand when he told me that my life is actually composed of 100,000 coin flips. I told him that, hey, if he told me that up front that he'll give me 100,000 chances, I would have thought about the question differently. But he pointed out that my gut causes me to perceive each choice in front of me as a one-off choice, whereas in reality, life is made up of 100,000 coin flips. The kind of choices that we have the more safe choices and we have the more risky choices. And the risky choices usually have better payoffs, and they're often much better for us to take than the safe choices. We actually lose out much more by sticking to the safe choices. But we don't feel that. When we go with our gut, our intuition, our feelings are that we want to feel safe and we want to be safe, and therefore we go with our emotions when we should go with our head and calculate the chances. So at that point, I realized that, hey, if I have to go with my gut, if my intuition is to go with my gut and go with the safe route, that's not the route that I want to be. I want to be the kind of person who gets 5 million over the course of their life rather than 4 million over the course of their life. So in order to do that, I have to remember that each choice that I face in front of me is part of a series of choices and treat it as part of a series of choices. What would I do if I was given 100,000 chances at each choice that I'm making? And that really helped me make much better decisions in the future and live a much better life, because now I can make the kind of decisions that are most likely to pay off for me. Not simply the safest choices, but the ones that will most likely pay off for me over the course of my life by treating each decision that is in front of me as part of a longer series of decisions.
Very wise, broad perspective. I think that brings a lot of good advice to the table. Thank you for explaining that further. So before we let you go and let our listeners get back on with their day, let's be sure we're telling them the best way to connect with you, to find information about your book and your research so that they can look at that further.
Sure. My book, Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters, is available in bookstores everywhere. They might be closed around you, and I would not recommend that you go to bookstores right now, even if they're open. So check it out online on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. There's digital copies, there's physical copies. Audible.com has an audiobook, so check that out if you like audiobooks. My own resources are on disasteravoidanceexperts.com. Again, disasteravoidanceexperts.com. There's blogs, videos, podcasts, online classes, coaching, videos, and so on, consulting services. You also especially want to check out a free 8 video-based module course on disasteravoidanceexperts.com/subscribe. Again, disasteravoidanceexperts.com/subscribe for a free 8 video-based module course. And finally, I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if you have any questions about anything I've shared in this podcast, please connect with me there. Dr. Gleb Tsipursky, GLEB TSIPURSKY.
Thank you so much, Gleb, for being with us today and sharing your passion and all of this extremely timely information.
Thank you so much for having me on, Marie. It's been a pleasure.